Welcome into another Purple Insider Extra. Matthew Coller here, along with Sam Ekstrom. Make sure that you're downloading the Purple Insider podcast wherever you get your podcasts and checking out our written work at purpleinsider.substack.com. All right, Sam, I was listening to the PFF Forecast podcast. They were doing a mock draft, and they mocked Trey Lance to the Minnesota Vikings. Let me ask you this question. If Trey Lance is on the board, number 14, would the Minnesota Vikings take Trey Lance?
Wow. Well, first of all, let's pour one out to North Dakota State because I think their winning streak got snapped without Lance last Saturday. And it could have been really interesting, Collar, because Trey Lance could have been playing like right up to the draft with the weird spring season they're doing in the FCS. But aside from that, if Trey Lance is available at 14, I mean, number one, that tells me that Zach Wilson jumped him, like Mac Jones jumped him, like he dropped to number 4 or 5 on the quarterback big board, which is interesting because I do think Rick Spielman has an appreciation for finding value in his draft picks, like players that have been overlooked, players that the Vikings had higher on their boards. And if that happened, I think there'd probably be value there. Trey Lance's stock is probably going to fall because he didn't really play a season and there's so limited an amount of film on him that I could see this scenario playing out where he's available. The Minnesota connection is so compelling, and it would set up the Vikings to look really foolish if they passed on him and he turned out to be a star. I think they should do it. I think if a gift like that falls to them, somebody local, somebody really exciting, someone that could, create a ton of attention and positive media coverage for your franchise, I think they should do it.
And somebody who needs development, like you mentioned, he only played 2019, played one game in the 2020 season, and that game didn't go particularly well. But when you look at his tools, he's got the strong arm, he's got great athleticism, and some looks of a quarterback, even though it was FCS, that sort of point you to a guy who can go through his reads and who can throw with anticipation, but needs a lot of ways to go before he's ready for the NFL. That sets up for a Vikings situation where you could play Kirk Cousins for 2021 and then plan to move on from Kirk Cousins to trade him away, similar to what happened with Kansas City and Alex Smith once upon a time when they drafted Patrick Mahomes. The other thing is, too, that with the draft, I know that everyone wants an offensive lineman, everyone wants a defensive lineman. There's other needs, too, safety, cornerback. But usually if you're drafting for needs that are down the road, that are a couple years down the road for when those players will make a real impact. Not everybody is Justin Jefferson, who makes a huge impact right away. Usually you have to wait for development anyway. And there's no more important position than quarterback. So if you have a long-term answer there by drafting someone that you can develop for a year and then decide, is he ready to go or is he not ready to go? I mean, the Packers have this with Jordan Love, where he was their third string quarterback, and maybe they just haven't seen anywhere near enough of Jordan Love to eventually want him as their franchise quarterback, but at least you're taking a shot at solidifying your future with that player. And if Trey Lance was like Mac Jones, I might say, I don't know, do you want another Kirk Cousins kind of where his ceiling is at? That's your best case scenario. But Trey Lance's athleticism, I think, matches up with the athletic profiles and the arm strength of a lot of the quarterbacks who are rising in the NFL today.
Let me ask you a question. Do you think the early success of Carson Wentz influences how we view Trey Lance, and should it influence how we view Trey Lance? Because even though Carson Wentz fell off a cliff, I still think his early, first couple of years in the league are indicative that a quarterback can come from North Dakota State and have NFL success, but he's also such a different quarterback than Trey Lance. So is that comparison valid at all?
Well, I think it is valid to say that playing at that level does not preclude you from eventually going to the NFL. The other thing it says is this: when Philadelphia won with Carson Wentz, they built an incredible team around him while he was on his rookie contract. Now, that team eventually fell apart because guys got older, they got expensive, but they were able to build up an incredible offensive line, a group of weapons to help him out. And the Vikings are already down the road on that for early draft pick offensive linemen like Brian O'Neill, Ezra Cleveland, and then they've got the weapons to hand someone eventually where they could be in a good situation, because I think a lot of quarterbacks fail that come in the draft because they go to bad teams, and then those teams are not able to fix what they have that's wrong with them, and you end up with a very poor situation. This might go for someone like Sam Darnold, that we might not ever know whether Sam Darnold could play, because he played for the New York Jets and had a very poor situation. The Vikings could give a young quarterback a really good spot. And I feel like also that year of development is so key to this formula. If you're making the Trey Lance argument, you can't say throw him right in right now. I think that would be a failure. That would be too difficult. But if you're saying that down the road he would be your quarterback, that's more of a valuable draft pick to you than any defensive lineman, any corner, any offensive lineman. You could find those guys much easier. You can develop those guys much easier. But the quarterback is something that you can only hope to find, really in this kind of situation.
I think we learn a lot about Kirk Cousins too. He's really never been threatened by like his successor as a backup. Certainly not in Minnesota, not really in the last years in Washington. They didn't know who was going to be next. We might get the best Kirk Cousins, and it also might cause some cracks in the facade. I don't know how he would respond. He typically has been pretty resilient when things aren't going well. He often is able to bounce back from that. And but we'd learn about, what kind of teammate he is when there's questions about being replaced, how he handles, mentoring someone in that position. I think it would create a lot of fascinating dynamics the Vikings haven't really embraced. They haven't wanted that around Kirk Cousins. So it would throw a pretty big wrench into that plan, but it might be worth it for the long-term benefit of your franchise.
I think it would be looked at on the outside like bailing on 2021, but I don't necessarily think it would have to be that. If you draft an offensive lineman, is he going to be great right away? Well, Ezra Cleveland wasn't, and neither was Brian O'Neill. If you draft a defensive lineman, are they going to be great right away? Even Danielle Hunter, who has become a superstar, was not great right away. He was more of a role player when he stepped in. And so I look at any position is going to take development, is going to be down the road, is what you're really looking at. If you can draft a quarterback with a ceiling that is a superstar, then I think you just have to take that shot. And for more discussion on these such matters, listen to the entire podcast, Purple Insider, or go to purpleinsider.substack.com. This has been another Purple Insider Extra.